In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good gifts and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. Last week we talked mostly about Saul when we hit Samuel at the beginning. Mostly about Saul. And we charted his life as it went up and down pretty dramatically. And our big kind of, so we talked about in the book of the first book of Kingdoms, Hannah's song lays the kind of trajectory for all 1, 2, 3, and 4 kingdoms. And there were kind of 3 big themes. God opposes the proud, and he exalts the lowly. Despite human sinfulness, God works through it. And God is making this promise of a Messianic king, this king that will reign over Israel. And we saw really clearly that king is supposed to be God. That's the whole problem with Israel demanding a king from Samuel, is that they have a king. But they want, quote unquote, a king like the other nations, which very explicitly means they want basically a tyrant king, this kind of priest king figure like the nations around them. I didn't really talk about Goliath. Goliath would be the kind of figure that they are asking for. This kind of demonic-ish strongman tyrant with secret pre-flood knowledge and all the weird stuff that's going on here. They don't get one of those. They get some tall person from Benjamin, Saul. And we saw his whole thing. What we're going to do today is look at Saul's replacement, David. And we have to backtrack a little bit because he shows up in Saul's story. Their stories kind of overlap. David enters right around the time Saul's life starts to fall apart, and David rises. So we're going to backtrack to right around the time Saul's life starts to fall apart and track David's life. So, to recap slightly, we have just seen Saul doing what? He has just been with the Amalekites. He was fighting against the Amalekites and he messed up real bad. And he did not, in fact, put a ban under the Amalekites, put the Amalekites under the ban. He kept some of the Amalekites alive, namely their king, and he kept some of their stuff and didn't devote it to destruction because he said, well, I know, Samuel, that you told me to destroy everything, but I didn't destroy everything. I took the best of what they had so that I could give it to the Lord. And that's when Samuel responds and says, God does not want to sacrifice demonic, tainted things at his tabernacle. He does not want your sacrifice. He wants your obedience. And so he walks away. And Samuel never sees Saul ever again. We immediately pick up at Samuel coming to the house of Jesse, where God has sent him and said, my next king is here. He goes to Jesse's sons. He arranges them by birth order. And Samuel ends up anointing the youngest boy, David, who is something like 12, maybe-ish, around this time period, 11, 12, something like that. Immediately, there's this big fight, this big battle against the Philistines. And Saul is trying to lead this battle against the Philistines. It's going really poorly. The Philistines are very strong. And basically, the two were at a stalemate. And so the Philistines are like, yeah, look, here's what we'll do. We'll just send our best fighter. You send your best fighter. they'll fight, and then whoever wins, well, they just win the war. Which seems reasonable until their best fighter comes out, and he's like 9.5 feet tall. And he's this huge guy, and he's covered in bronze armor, and his name is Goliath. And he basically stands on the hill and points at Israel and says, all right, send your biggest guy. And everyone in Israel's just like, I'm not going to fight. Are you going to? And no one's going out. Saul is also not going out. This is all the problem. Everyone has gone full Gideon, full coward. David shows up to bring like food. His like older brothers are in the army. So he comes to bring food and he goes, I thought I'd see a battle. That's kind of disappointing. And they're like, yeah, they got this really big guy. And David's like, why should one strong person on the other side make all of Israel cower? You're the Lord's people. His whole thing is that you're supposed to fight the demons. Go fight them. You'll win. And everyone's like, I don't know, man. He's pretty big. And so David goes, I'll fight him then. And again, he's like this 10-year-old kid. He's like, I'll fight him. And they're like, no. So they bring him to Saul. Saul, this small child, walks in and says, I'll fight the giant. And Saul's like, no. And then he says, no, you don't understand. I'm a shepherd. Saul's like, I don't understand. He goes, I've killed a bear with my bare hands. I've killed lions. Nothing has ever taken a single sheep from my flock. Why should this dog be any different? So Saul like puts his armor on David, and it's like giant. It's like comedically large. David can't even like move. So he takes all the armor off, and David just goes out with his shepherd stuff. He's got a staff, he's got a sling, he's got 5 stones. He walks out. Goliath walks up, and he's just like, "Oh, Israel's best man was a small child. I'm going to destroy you, and your God sucks." And David comes out and says, "No, he doesn't." Pops him in the head. Goliath falls down. David takes Goliath's own sword and kills him. Very quickly composes all of Psalm 151, which you should read at some point. It's all about killing Goliath. And David basically is just like, this is what Israel is supposed to do. This is just some guy with demon powers. And I'm just some kid with God on my side. Come on. Like, this is what it's supposed to be like. God promised that this is exactly what would happen. Everyone's really cool about it. Everyone says, like, David's great. David gets brought into the court of Saul. He's a really good musician, as evidenced by the entire book of Psalms. And so Saul's at this weird point in his life where he has messed up big time. And he has not really repented for it. And so God is letting evil spirits kind of torment him a little bit to try and prompt him to repentance. It never happens. Saul never really repents of anything at this point, really. But whenever Saul has this evil spirit come to him, they bring David in. He plays cool lyre music and sings, and the evil spirits get driven away. And so Saul stops being tormented by the spirit. And that's basically the relationship between David and Saul at this point. David, if you remember, has been anointed as the new king of Israel, but no one knows about it except David and Samuel. And so things are fine. David is chilling in Saul's house. He ends up becoming best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. They hang out all the time, and they're super cool, and Jonathan will show up over and over and over again. It gets really great. Saul has a daughter named Michal. He ends up giving Michal, his daughter, to David as David's wife. He does it like a weird way. So like Saul's getting really jealous of David, who again, if we remember, is like a child. Although I suppose we're supposed to understand that David, like, he's probably like 16. Like he's grown up a little bit. But he's like really good in battle. Every time he goes into battle, they win. And David is like absolutely killing it, pun intended. And people are making all these songs that are like, Saul killed thousands. David killed tens of thousands. And so Saul's getting really jealous of this punk kid who's like super good at everything. And And so he ends up like giving his daughter Michal to David, but he's just like, but you have to earn her. And he sends David to battle and he says, I need you to go kill this many Philistines. And he has him bring like a certain proof of it. And the idea being that David will not be able to do this single-handedly. He'll die, and then Saul won't have to be jealous of him anymore. But David goes into battle, and because he's super cool and humble and really faithful to the Lord's just like, yeah, absolutely. Brings it all back, and she's like, yeah, did it, done, easy. So Saul gives his daughter Michal to David, and they have no children ever. She appears later in the story. I'm going to probably skip over it because, frankly, it's not. I have to pick things to include and not include. But anyway, David is now a member of the royal family. He is now Saul's son-in-law. He is best friends with the prince, and he is the personal exorcist of the king. And he's like the second most important general. The most important general's name is Abner. Abner sucks. So I will never speak good of Abner throughout this whole story, basically. He'll never show up in a good way. But he's technically Saul's right-hand man. But David's the one who's actually like winning all the battles. Saul kind of loses his mind at this point, and he decides he's going to kill David. So one day, he's laying in bed, all demoned out, and David comes in and plays music, and Saul's just like, oh, I feel so much better. So he grabs his spear, and he throws it at David to try and murder him. And David runs out of the room because I would too. Saul is immediately just kind of like, what have I done? And they kind of reconcile a little bit. And then he's like, man, I can't stand that David guy. So he sends him into battle at like the front line, his whole leg. And he's like, I'm going to come up with the worst battle strategy I can so that everyone dies and David will die with him. Except that the Lord is with David. And so David doesn't die, and it's this huge victory. And Saul's like, I didn't want us to win that one, whatever. So then he's like, what if I get my personal bodyguards, my 3 mighty men, to just go murder David? But they go, and they like can't get him. Like David like escapes from their grasp. And so like some other day, Saul is all demoned out again, and he tries to kill him with the whole spear thing again, which didn't work the first time. And it didn't work the second time either. And then there's this whole thing where like David's like out in the field and he's hanging out with Jonathan because he and Jonathan are like besties. And they like come up with this plan, and Jonathan's like, I don't know if my dad wants to kill you still, because Saul's doing like this full bungee jump back and forth between David is my best friend and my son, and I want to destroy him. And so Jonathan like goes to dinner with his dad, and there's like the secret code word he's going to yell into the field where David's hiding. Anyway, they have a whole thing. Saul gets so mad at Jonathan for defending David that he tries to kill Jonathan, his actual son. And there's like this whole thing. Stuff is bad. David never is in the house of Saul again after this point. David runs off. Jonathan runs out, and the field is just like, get out of here. So this is a whole big thing. David runs to Ahimelech. Ahimelech is the high priest. He goes to the high priest to get provisions and weapons because he's like, it's just some guy. So he goes to Ahimelech, and Ahimelech is like, well, we have the bread of the temple that only the priests are supposed to eat. So you and your men can have all of that. And he has Goliath's sword, which has been in the temple. Well, it's not a temple. In the tabernacle this whole time as an offering to the Lord. And so David says, there is no better sword in the land of Israel. And from this point forward, David has Goliath's sword as his personal sword that he can wield. Now, remembering that Goliath was like 9 feet tall. David is not 9 feet tall, but he's so cool that he can just wield this giant bronze sword. Saul finds out about this, and he goes to the tabernacle, and he has his people murder the high priest and all of the priests who were at the tabernacle, which typically you shouldn't do. If you're a follower of God Most High, you should not murder all of the priests. typically works out poorly for you. One of them gets away, though. It's really cool. One of them gets away, and he flees to David. He's like, David, you'll never believe it. Saul's lost his mind, and he's killing people. And David's like, I would never have imagined that could happen. Anyway, so this guy becomes kind of like, I mean, he is now the high priest, technically. I mean, he hasn't really been installed as high priest, but like Ahimelech's son is now he's the high priest now. And so he's kind of this back and forth. He's clearly on David's side, and he's offering the sacrifices of the temple for David. Saul is upset, but understandably does not want to kill more priests. Then we get some stuff. David goes and hides in this cave. Saul brings his people to the cave. David's like, I always imagine it as like not that deep of a cave because I don't know how deep the caves in the Holy Land are. But I imagine David's just like up on the ceiling all ninja style. But like also all of his people are in there. So I don't really know how it works. Saul walks in. He's like, David, are you in here? David does not answer because David is not an idiot. And Saul goes, I guess he's not in here. So he just like sits down in the cave. And someone next to David is like, David, now's your chance. You could kill him. And David basically, somehow having this conversation without Saul hearing, is basically like, how dare you? This is the Lord's anointed. I cannot bring my hand up against the Lord's anointed. So he gets down, he climbs over, and he cuts a little corner off of Saul's cloak. And without Saul noticing, and when Saul leaves the cave, David walks out of the cave and says, the Lord my king, see this corner of your cloak. I could have killed you, and I chose not to. What have you against me? And that's when Saul goes, David, my son, is it you? I'm so sorry. We can be friends again, I promise. And David goes, sounds good. And then doesn't go to hang out with Saul because he's not an idiot. But they're technically reconciled. But David's like, it's cool. I'll be your friend from over here, and you can be my friend from over there. And that's okay. What do you know? This kind of thing happens again. They're like traveling through the land, and all of Saul, because Saul immediately goes back to like hunting David to like murder him. And he's like sleeping in a field. And he's got his spear stabbed into the ground next to his head, and there's like a water jar next to him. And everyone's asleep. And so one of David's men is like, David, this is your chance. You could go into the field and kill Saul, and then you won't be being hunted by the king anymore. And David is like, stop telling me to kill the king. I would never kill the king of Israel. It's not how this works. He still sneaks into the camp, though. And he sneaks into the camp with all his people, and he takes the spear and the water jug from right next to Saul and like Scooby-Doo tiptoes out. And he's standing on the hill, and he yells down, and he goes, Abner, who is like the general. Abner. So Abner wakes up, and he goes, Abner, what's wrong with you? Someone could have snuck into your camp and killed the king of Israel. Do your freaking job. And so everyone wakes up, and he's like, I have the spear and the water jug that were next to Saul's head. And you just like were sleeping the whole time. And that's when Saul goes, David, my son, is it you? Do you want to be friends again? And David's like, yes. But also it feels like we've reached the point of slightly no return here, Saul. And so David walks away. He leaves. He goes to the Philistines. If you don't remember who the Philistines are, that's where Goliath was from. David goes to the Philistines, tells them that he is now the sworn enemy of Saul because Saul is trying to kill him. And they're like, oh, but you're a really good general. Do you want to be our really good general? And he's like, absolutely. And so they're like, cool. You'll just live in this town over here. And so he and his men all live in that town over there. And they're like, we'll just like tell you when there's someone we want you to invade and murder. And you'll just like do it. And David's like, absolutely. And so they keep telling him to kill people, and he keeps not doing it. He actually goes around and starts attacking the different Nephilim tribes around. And then so he's killing the Nephilim tribes. And then he takes their stuff and then he brings it back and he goes, look, it's all the stuff from the tribe of Dan of the Israelites that you told me to attack. We attacked them and won. But he's not actually attacking Israel. He's attacking Nephilim tribes. So he's technically doing the thing the king of Israel is supposed to be doing, but he's doing it in this very strange situation. And that, then the Philistines come to David and they go, all right, we're going to go attack actual full-on Israel. And we want you in in the main army with us because you're really good. And David's like, yes, I'll do it. And so they start going to the army. And then some of the Philistine generals are just like, we can't have David in our army when we go to attack Israel. He's an Israelite. He'll just betray us, join his people, and then we'll lose. And so the king of the Philistines comes to David and says, they told me that you would betray us. And David's like, I would never betray you. And he's like, I know, but I can't get them to go into battle if you're with us. So you can actually just go back home. It's real cool. And so David goes back home and he doesn't have to fight against Israel, which is really cool of God that happened. The Philistines go into battle against the Israelites. Saul goes into battle. This is the whole thing where Saul has he hires the witch to resurrect Samuel, all that fun stuff. You can look at last week's video. They go into battle. All of Saul's children die. I shouldn't say all. Technically, not all of them. Anyway, Saul's kids die. Saul dies. Jonathan is dead. Everything's terrible. Saul has died by committing suicide. There's all these different things that go on. And Saul is utterly destroyed, and his house is utterly destroyed. Questions up to that point in David's life.
So why Philistines were not stop David, especially David killed his Goliath?
Who knows?
Okay.
Who knows? I mean, they don't really. Right? So the one Philistine king is like, yeah, you can go live way over here and just attack people sometimes for us. And David kind of does that. I mean, he doesn't attack who they want him to attack. He goes and attacks other Nephilim tribes. But the Philistines also don't care if he attacks them. Those are also rival clans. He's just not attacking Israel. No, when he does actually go into, he's going to, bring his men and join the Philistine army, none of the Philistine generals want him there. It's only the king of the Philistines that trusts him at all. So, yeah. All right. Saul has died. David is the only person who has ever been anointed the king of Israel, who is still alive at this point. And it's going to go poorly-ish. But David has basically risen to the height of power. We're going to watch him consolidate it, basically. So he becomes the king of Judah. And he gets word from the people in battle with the Philistines. Guy comes up and says, it was terrible. Everyone died. Even the Lord's anointed Saul has died. And David goes, how did Saul die? And we all know how Saul died. Saul killed himself after demanding one of the Israelites kill him so that the Philistines couldn't get him. And that Israelite absolutely refused to kill Saul because he's like, I'm not going to kill the Lord's anointed. That is absolutely not what I signed up for. And so Saul calls him a coward, kills himself. And then that guy kills himself. This guy comes running to David and he goes, he basically went over to Saul and took his sword and stuff. And he runs back and he goes, Saul has died and here's his stuff. And David goes, how did he die? And the guy says, Saul looked me in the eyes and asked me to kill him. And so I did what the Lord's anointed told me to do. And then I brought his stuff to you. And David's like, you killed the king of Israel? Kill this man. And they immediately kill him. And so David's just absolutely not. I am not okay with no one is allowed to kill someone from Saul's family and then dare look me in the eye like I'm supposed to be happy about that. Make that very clear right now. And so they have this huge mourning. Festival is the wrong word for this, but days and days of mourning for Saul and Jonathan, and he has them buried, and all these different things. One of Saul's kids is named Ishbosheth, because Saul should never be allowed to name his kids ever again. And his kid's name is Ishbosheth. And Ishbosheth, I can't even say it. Ishbosheth, basically gets all the people around him to be like, well, I'm the son of the king who died, so I'm king now. That's how kings work. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. So he becomes the king of Israel up in Hebron. David is the king of Judah. He ends up being the king of Judah for 7 years. That becomes mildly important. There's this big war between the house of David and the house of Saul because David's like, I'm the real king. Samuel said so. And Ishbosheth is like, I'm the real king because I said so. And so they have this big fight. There's a war. Isn't there always? Some guy goes up and kills Ishbosheth and brings his head to David. And he's like, I have killed your enemy, O king. Here is his head. And David goes, you killed someone from Saul's family? That's the Lord's anointed family, you absolute moron. So he has that guy killed. He's like really not into this whole kill Saul's family thing. That will continue to be a thing for literally the rest of his entire kingship. People will continue to kill people, bring something to David as proof. And David's just gonna be like, I told you not to kill him. I've been so clear this whole time. It does, however, stop the civil war. And David does become king of Hebron because everyone in Hebron is like, well, that was Saul's last kid. And David was really good. And he's like kind of Saul's family. So David could be king. So he ends up becoming king of now this united kingdom. He has been king of Judah for 7 years. He will be the king of all of Israel for 33 years. And all of this has just happened on David's 30th birthday. So he has been king of Judah he has been king of Judah for 7 years. He is now 30 years old. He will be the king. He will live another 33 years as king of the whole thing. If I'm remembering any of those numbers correctly. From here, things go pretty well. He goes to Jerusalem, which is still being held by the Jebusites. And he goes in and he's just like, I'm taking the city. And they're like, no, you're not. And then he takes the city because he's David. He takes it. He renames. Well, the mountain's name is Zion, which if you've ever read the Old Testament, you know that Zion is this mountain. David builds a city on top of Zion. He's very humble and he names it the City of David. And he decides that the Ark of the Covenant should be on Zion, where he can protect it. So he goes down to where the Ark of the Covenant is. He has a bunch of people put the poles in the slots and pick it up, whatever. And they're like walking stuff and it's great, stuff like that. And then they hit this rough patch of the road and someone's like, oh no, the Ark's going to fall down, and puts his hands up against it and immediately drops dead. Because rule number 1 is you don't touch the Ark of the Covenant. Even the high priest does not touch the Ark of the Covenant. So they're all just kind of standing there like, So instead of taking it to Jerusalem, they take it to some guy's house. His name is Obed-Edom. And they take it to his house and they're like, hey, this is the Ark of the Covenant. Would you hold on to this for us for a little bit? And he's like, sure. So they leave the Ark of the Covenant in his house for 3 months. They leave the Ark of the Covenant in his house for 3 months. And it's great. David goes back to the city of Zion and is just like, I don't know what to do about this. Reports come from Obed-Edom's house that the Lord is just abundantly blessing him. And David's like, that Ark should really be in my city. So he consults the priests, finds out the correct way to move the Ark of the Covenant. They go down to Obed-Edom's house. They get the Ark of the Covenant. They walk it up to Jerusalem. We're told that they make it 7 steps before David basically goes out and does this one-man dance routine in front of the Ark of the Covenant and offers a big sacrifice and all these different things. which feels weird to us because like this whole, like he's not a priest. This is like a whole weird thing. David is fine. David, nothing bad happens to David. This is the other time his wife Michal shows up. She's angry with him. He gets angry back. It goes poorly. Anyway. But they bring the ark up to Jerusalem. David apparently has divine sanction to offer sacrifices under extremely special circumstances. Something Saul got into like big trouble for, David does. We can talk about that later if someone has a question about that, because I do have things. I have time. We get up there, we get to Jerusalem. You get this weird throwaway line that David's sons also serve as priests. Full-on throwaway line, never brought up again. He's like, hey, I live in this giant palace. God lives in a tent. Should I do something about that? And he goes to this guy named Nathan. And Nathan is the prophet who hangs out with David's court. He's like the new Samuel. And he goes, Nathan, should I build a giant palace for God who currently lives in like a tent? And Nathan goes, I'm so glad you bothered to ask the prophet ever before doing something. The previous guy didn't do that a lot. It's a real nice change of pace. So he goes, he prays. God comes to a dream and says, no, David does not. I live in a tent and it's fine. I'm not actually asking for you to build a temple, frankly. Number 2, David has killed so many people. No, bloody hands are not allowed to build a house for me. Absolutely not. Number 3, David is very cool. I love him a lot. I'm going to make his kingdom last forever. And one of his kids can build a temple for me later. If David like really is bothered by this, let him know it'll happen later. So Nathan comes back to David and says, God is not asking you to build a temple. He is definitely not asking you to build a temple, Mr. War King. And number 3, your kid will do it. And David goes, oh, okay. And Nathan goes, also, your kingdom will last forever. And David's like, sick. And then David finds out that one of Jonathan's kids is still alive. Jonathan is also never allowed to name kids again. His kid's name is Mephibosheth. So destine your child for greatness and name them Mephibosheth. Full on. Mephibosheth is... He's a cool guy. He's kind of lame. Pun intended. His feet are crippled. And he's Jonathan's kid. And they like... It really is this weird story. So David goes to meet him. And he's like, your dad and I used to hang out and go fishing a lot. It was really cool. And Mephibosheth is like, are you going to kill me like all of Saul's other kids have died? And David goes, no, your dad and I were really cool. I just really like you. Do you want to come live in Jerusalem and in luxury? And Mephibosheth is like, okay. So he moves to Jerusalem and he lives in the palace and he, quote, has dinner with David every night. He shows up like 8 more times, but he never does anything important, but he keeps getting mentioned. So rereading through it, I was just like, he's not important. He's not important in the slightest. But he like full on, every so often they're just like, and Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, he eats with the king every night. He's very cool. And I was like, yeah, I'm aware. I read that part of the book. Anyway, it's also Mephibosheth. So, what a good name.
Exegesis by other authors that says Jonathan's son wasn't important. Exegesis, I mean.
Oh, is this like a thing that he's not important?
Yeah.
No, he's just kind of lame. I mean, he like full on doesn't do anything.
But David's nice.
And they were his dad was David's best friend, and so he takes her. It's David's generosity.
Yeah.
Again, David isn't happy that Saul is dead. David reveres Saul, true king of Israel, despite being bad. Saul never stopped being the Lord's anointed. He just God took the kingdom from him, but like David didn't want Saul dead. David did not want Jonathan dead by any means. We're going to see more people from Saul's family that keep kind of popping in and out and stuff like that. Every single time someone from Saul's family shows up or Saul's imperial court shows up, all of the time someone is going to walk up to David and be like, should I kill this dog for you? And David's like, just stop. Stop doing that. No, that person is holy. That person was consecrated by God for a purpose. You can't just kill them. Or dismiss them or anything, because just because I'm king now even doesn't mean that there's something that like we're going to wipe them out. We're not like other people. That's like one of the big things too, because he's acting very, very differently. So the Israelites said, give us a king like the other nations. And they got one kind of. They got Saul, who did kind of act like a king for one of the other nations. He does a bunch of sacrifices to try and manipulate God. He hires a witch to do necromancy to manipulate God. He is selfish. He is doing stuff all the time. Like, they got a king like other nations. A rival king pops up in his kingdom. What does he do? Disbands all other activities in the entire kingdom to hunt this one guy who has never threatened him before. Just because he might be a rival king. David is not like that. David is not jealous of Saul's family. David is not trying to manipulate God. The one time we see David do things, when we see David do things that Saul did, typically David doesn't get punished for it. And we get this sense that he talks to Nathan the prophet all the time. And he just asks Nathan what he should do. And Nathan probably just tells him. Like, we see that happen once. And again, scripture doesn't like always repeat all of the details all the time. But we just see that like he's like in good stuff. Now, we will see David mess up. David does severely mess up at one point. Hasn't yet. But yeah, I think the way he treats Mephibosheth is just like another thing. Like, David is not a giant. David is not like Goliath. He is not like Saul. He has nothing to fear from Mephibosheth. Why? Because he's the Lord's anointed. And he's following the law. So he has nothing to fear. There is no potential rival king. Because anyone who would set themselves up as a potential rival king, we saw what happened to them. They died. Ishbosheth. It just didn't work. And even then, David was like, don't kill him. Just tell him to knock this off. So, yeah. In the next chapter, though, stuff goes bad. So David is now at the height of his kingdom. Everything's great. Saul's family is now kind of reconciled with him. King of all of Israel. Things are going great. He wins a whole bunch of battles. I skipped that. He wins a whole bunch of battles. And then one day we are told it's that time of year again when wars happen and kings lead their men into battle. Now, David's army was going into battle, but David was at home. And that is our first clue that something's wrong. So we just got told it's that time of year when kings lead their soldiers into battle. David was not leading his soldiers into battle. Instead, he's walking around on his roof, and he's got a very tall house. And he sees this lady, Bathsheba, taking a bath on the roof of her house. You know how sometimes you just take baths on the roof of your house, apparently. He thinks she's really pretty. He has her brought into his house, and he commits adultery with Bathsheba. Bathsheba's husband is also not a nobody. He's one of David's right-hand guys. His name is Uriah, which means the light of God. He's also a foreigner. He's a Hittite who has joined the covenant. So he's got this really cool status where he's exactly what's supposed to be going on in Israel. The other nations are supposed to be joining Israel. Bathsheba gets pregnant. He's just like, oh no, Uriah's been in battle forever because that's what they do. Clearly, he's going to know something's up. So he has Uriah brought back. he tries to get Uriah drunk several times, tries to get him to sleep with his wife so that it'll cover it all up. Eventually, he comes up with this perfect plan, but Uriah won't. Uriah's like, no, my men are in battle. How could I possibly sleep in my bed when they are sleeping in the fields? And he sleeps on the street because he's just a really good guy. So David sends him into battle, and he sends him with orders in an envelope to hand to the general. And in the envelope, it says, make Uriah stand in the front lines and to do this thing so that he'll die. And he has Uriah deliver that letter. And Uriah never opens it because he's a good man and he would never open the king's mail. And so he hands that off. He gets led in battle and Uriah dies. And the next day, they bring the news to David about this horrible military defeat. And David's like, let it not trouble your hearts. This happens sometimes. And then the next day, he's like, hey, Bathsheba, would you like to come live in the royal palace and be my concubine? And she's like, yes. And then Nathan the prophet shows up and he goes, David, you know how you talk to me all the time? And I've always told you if you're going to make a really big decision, you should always check with me first. I've got this question for you. And he goes on this story and he describes this situation that this thing. And this guy has messed up really bad. Stuff like that. And he goes, you're the king. What do you think we should do about it? And he's like, that man should be killed. He has done a horrible thing in Israel. And Nathan goes, oh, okay. That man happens to be you. I have just told a story about what you literally just did with Bathsheba and Uriah. And it works. David is like, you are correct. That is what has happened. Comes to a senses, he repents. And what ends up happening is that because of this, God tells David basically there's going to be two consequences to this. Number one, that child is not going to live. Because your heir, your first child, I will not allow the kingdom to be passed to the child committed in adultery in this way. Number two, your family will be plagued by war for the rest of its existence. And David is like, bummer. That's not good. And all these bad things start happening. And now we're going to watch David's life do this. David has a bunch of sons. They are named lots of things. I am skipping over them. Except for one named Amnon, one is named Absalom, and he has a daughter named Tamar. They are the only three that matter for the rest of the story. Amnon falls in love with Tamar, which is one, very weird. Number two, something he should probably see someone about and whatever. Anyway, he ends up coming up with this weird scheme to try. Anyway, he ends up committing adultery with his sister. It's this horrible thing that happens. And Absalom is very angry about it. And one day, Absalom invites Amnon, his brother, to go hunting with him. And they go out to the field. And it's just Amnon and Absalom and all of Absalom's bodyguards going on a hunting trip. They get out to go on the hunting trip. And wouldn't you know it, Absalom's really angry, so he kills Amnon. And then word gets back to David. He's deeply upset that Amnon is dead. He's deeply upset about what happened to Tamar. And he has Absalom brought back to Jerusalem. So Absalom had been living, all of his sons had been living in various spots in the kingdom. So he has Absalom brought back to Jerusalem. He says, you're going to live in Jerusalem, but he won't talk to him. So for 2 years, Absalom lives in this little house near the palace, and his dad, David, won't talk to him, won't acknowledge his existence for 2 years. Absalom gets real bored. Also, Absalom is very pretty. These are things we learn about Absalom in the next verse. He is gorgeous and bored. So he's like, man, I want to go see my dad. So he goes and he sends a servant to go knock on the door, and he's like, hey, tell my dad that I've I've been living in the city for 2 years, but he won't like talk to me. It's really weird. Can I just go live somewhere else? I like have this summer home in like Hebron or whatever. And no, absolutely not. And he's, fine. So Absalom goes to the city gate. Now, David is the judge of Israel. He's the king, but he's also judging Israel. And so people from all over Israel come to Jerusalem, to the city, to have their disputes figured out by David to get justice. Absalom ends up standing at the city gates, and people come in and they've got this like judgment thing, and Absalom's like, "Oh man, yeah, what do you come to see my dad? Yeah, he's really cool. You've got like this whole problem going on. Why don't you tell me about it? And I'll like point you in the right direction of like who to talk to." And they'll like tell him a thing, and he then lies and says, "Oh, yeah, we don't have like a department for that because my dad didn't think those kinds of disputes were important. If I were in charge, be different. We could probably help you. But as it is, unfortunately, there's nothing the king can do, so you should just leave." And he just like starts turning people away all the time, but blaming his dad for it. And David has no idea. David absolutely would be helping these people, whatever. But Absalom keeps being like, "Wow, if I were in charge, it wouldn't be like this." But I'm not in charge, so too bad. He basically gets all of Israel to like him more than David. He starts a rebellion. He brings all these people into Jerusalem. David has to flee. It's this whole thing. It's like 7 chapters. It's like a lot. Anyway, there's this huge war. Lots of stuff happens. We get more people from Saul's house dissing David and people telling David, "I could kill this man right now." And David's like, "Stop doing that." The war goes on. They go into battle against Absalom. Joab, who is David's general, tells David, "Don't come to battle today." And David's like, "I'm so sad. I guess I won't go to battle today. It's fine." And he says, "Just whatever you do, make sure you don't hurt Absalom." And so Joab's like, "I promise I won't." And then he goes and he's like, we have to kill this Absalom guy right now. We have to get rid of this. We got to stop this war. So they kill Absalom. David finds out. He's very upset. Joab gets all angry at David. Things are bad. David has basically lost all of his family members at this point, who mattered to him in any way, shape, or form. His kingdom has fallen apart in a lot of ways. He is still king of Israel, but he's really sad about it. Now Absalom's dead. And then we get the last bit. And the last bit of the book is a chiastic structure. What a chiastic structure means is the first thing and the last thing go together. The second thing and the second to last thing go together. The third thing and the third to last thing go together, etc., all the way up. That's what it's called a chiastic structure. I'm going to tell you the whole chiastic structure, walk you through it, and then I'm going to read part of it, and that'll be the whole thing. So, Saul messes up real bad, having to do with the wars against the Nephilim. The last thing is how David messes up in the wars against the Nephilim. The second thing is this story about David and his mighty men, his top 3 guys. And the second to last story is another story of David and his 3 mighty men. And in the middle is a psalm, not from the book of Psalms, but another psalm, because there's a lot of psalms that aren't in the book of Psalms. And I don't know that I'll be able to read the whole thing. Maybe not. But if we hearken back to Hannah's song was at the beginning of First Kingdoms, and it told us basically here's what's going to go on. God wants to bring up this Messianic king. It's supposed to be God himself. We'll get to that later. His name is Jesus. But God opposes the proud and he exalts the humble, and he works despite human sinfulness. He is still able to work. He still brings good up. That was our whole theme this whole time. We've seen that. David used to be great. And then David messes up real bad. And then this whole time this bad stuff just keeps happening. And people like Joab, who are this haughty, arrogant general, are perpetuated. Every time someone exalts themselves, they keep getting brought down low. And not just them, but it affects everyone around them. Bad things happen. Again, we've been mostly talking about this one David guy, but all of Israel has been suffering as David's reign has declined. So, Saul, if you remember, did not remove the Gibeonites for various reasons. That becomes an issue. And God basically tells David to reflect on all of Saul's family and how all of Saul's family, except for Mephibosheth, who's very cool and has a very weird name, but he's also super lame. Everyone in Saul's family has died except for him, and it's only because of the generosity of David. And God says, because of how he handled the Nephilim wars. It's because of the fact that he would not remove sin. He would not remove the demon worship from the land. That was his one job. And because he would not do that, his family has been wiped from the face of the earth, except for that one guy. Kind of the same thing has happened to David. His kingdom has fallen kind of apart. And it has to do with the fact that it's not so much that he didn't keep fighting Nephilim, it's that he became one of them. He became a giant in some way. He abused his power and he broke the commandments of God. And he greatly abused the people in his kingdom. And so we get that going on. We get some cool stuff with David and his mighty men. They fight a war with the Philistines in Gath. We get the names of 4 kings, and it's very explicit. And they fought such and such a person, one of the giants, and they killed him. And they fought so-and-so, who was also one of the giants. And they kill 4 of the giants. Then we get the cool song that I'll skip for now. Then we get another thing about how David and his mighty men, he's got wars with Philistine. We get the names of a bunch of his mighty men. At one point, you get this very cool story of David is so thirsty because they've been out of water. Because they even live in a desert. And so his mighty men are like, let's do it. So they sneak in. So they sneak into the enemy's camp while David's asleep and everyone's asleep. They sneak into the enemy's camp and get water from the wells of their enemies. And they bring it back to David. And they go, hey, David, wake up. We have water. And he goes, where did you get the water? And they're like, we snuck into the camp. And David says, I can't drink that. That's your blood. You could have died just because I'm thirsty? No, I can't. I cannot in good conscience put your lives in danger and receive a blessing on my behalf because your lives are in danger. That wouldn't be right. So you get that story. And then it ends with David takes a census. David is like, how many people live in Israel? And Joab is like, a lot. I don't know. And he goes, find out exactly how many. And we're told in the book of Chronicles why. We are told that the reason David takes the census is to find out how many soldiers he has available because he's worried he doesn't have enough to defend his kingdom. He's now had this whole Amnon thing, this whole Absalom thing. His kingdom has been rocked to its core by rebellion, stuff like that. And he's basically like, I need to find out really where am I at politically and strength, like that. Which is to say, David isn't trusting God. David is falling into the same kind of thinking as the Philistines. Well, if we're just big enough and if we're just strong enough and if we're just resilient enough ourselves, then we'll be okay. Instead of being like himself, who killed Goliath when he was like a child because he was on God's side. It doesn't matter if you have, in fact, having too many people is something God regularly says, send some people home. Your army is just way too big. If you bring too big of an army into battle, you might get confused and think that you won instead of me winning. And so that's what David says. He also, we're told in Chronicles, asked Joab not to forget to count the Levites. And that's a problem because the Levites are 100% not supposed to go into battle. And that's another thing that's going on with David's census. So, a little bit of David's song at the end, which gives us kind of the wrapping up the story. O Lord, my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer, my God, my guardian, in whom I trust, my defender, horn of my salvation, my protector and refuge of my salvation. You will save me from unrighteousness. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised, and I will be saved from my enemies, etc., etc. There's more going on. Let me get to the next part. It's a lot of things like that. He talks about how when he followed the law, God blessed him. With the holy, you will be holy. With a perfect man, you will be perfect. With the chosen, you will be the chosen one. And with the devious, you will be shrewd. You save the needy, but you will humble the eyes of the haughty. You are my lamp. You shall enlighten my darkness. Who is mighty except the Lord? Who will be the creator except for God, the mighty one who strengthens me with power and has prepared my way blameless? You have given me the protection of my salvation, and your gentleness fulfills me. I shall pursue my enemies and destroy them. I will not turn back until I destroy them. I will break them. They will not rise, for they will fall under my feet. You will deliver me from the quarrels of the people. You have kept me at the head of the nations. A people I have not known served me. Philistines deceived me. As soon as they heard, they obeyed me. Philistines shall be cast out, and they will stumble out from their hideouts. The Lord lives. Blessed be my guardian. Let my God be exalted, the guardian of my salvation. It is the mighty Lord who avenges me and chastises the people under me. He delivers me from mine enemies. You will lift me above those who rise against me. They will deliver me from the man of injustice. And then we get David's last words. And that's where I'll end the whole thing. David's last words. David, the faithful one, the son of Jesse, the faithful man whom the Lord raised up, the anointed of the God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord spoke by me, and his word was on my tongue. The God of Israel says, a guardian of Israel spoke a parable, saying, among men, how will you strengthen the fear of God? By God, the sun may arise in the light of early morning. The early morning does not pass by without light. So after rain, new growth shows forth out of the earth. For my house is not so with the mighty one, for he prepared an everlasting covenant with me, keeping it prepared for every time. For my entire salvation and my every desire is that the lawless may not in any way flourish. All of them are as thorns thrusting outward, for they cannot be taken by the hand. And a man will not labor among them, unless armed with iron and the shaft of a spear, and to their dishonor they shall be burned with fire.